Hello everyone. Today's lecture is going to be on healthy body weight. And what we're going to be focusing in on in this lecture is really two components, and that is body composition as well as weight management. So the first section we're going to be talking about body composition, which is from chapter 4, and we're going to go over how to evaluate body composition, how to understand what your weight is telling you when it comes to health, the classification you would be at with weight based on certain evaluation tools, and then we'll go on to weight management, which is from chapter 5, which will focus essentially on the fundamentals of designing a diet, which is calories consumed versus energy expenditure, and we'll talk about how to maintain weight, how to lose weight, how to gain weight, and then we'll also go over some obesity trends that are important to note. So the first thing we want to talk about is what is healthy body weight, and look at some considerations when it comes to healthy body weight. And the first consideration we want to look at is how it's appropriate for your age. So your current age is going to play a role in what your body weight or what your current body weight looks like. We tend to start losing weight as we get older, just as the body degrades, so we can start losing muscle mass. So that would drop our weight. A lot of people tend to increase fat mass as they get older, and that would affect your weight. So we have to make sure that we understand what's going to be appropriate when it comes to what our weight reads on the scale with our age. And there's some evaluation tools to do that to help you understand sort of where you need to be weight-wise for your current age. We also want to make sure that a healthy body weight is maintained without constant dieting. And this is really important for our heart health, as well as just overall health. But what happens with people who go through what's called yo-yo dieting, which is when we have a hard time keeping the same body weight. So usually what happens with the yo-yo dieter is they gain a bunch of weight, they go on a diet, they lose it, they gain that weight back, they go on the diet again and lose it, and that just is a continuing chain that goes for several years. But what we need to note is the physiology that is happening is actually putting great stress on your heart. We see people who yo-yo diet, their hearts are actually at risk for a lot of cardiovascular disease because of the amount of fat that we bring in, they get rid of, and then rush with more fat. And it's just, it's unfortunately very unhealthy for the body. So ideally what we want to do is just make sure we have a consistent, balanced diet that is adequate in nutrients and has a variety of foods in order to maintain weight for long periods of time, ideally throughout our whole life. Another aspect of healthy body weight is we want to make sure that it's acceptable to us. We want to make sure we are okay with the body weight we have. And we also want to make sure that it's acceptable to us within the healthy parameters. And that could be acceptable for the muscle mass you may want, or acceptable for your activity levels. So we just want to make sure that within a healthy realm, our body weight is acceptable to us, because we do need to be comfortable with ourselves and happy with who we are. Another aspect of body weight that we need to note is genetics plays a big role in it. So family history, body shape, weight of ancestors, that is going to play a role in body weight and the type of weight we gain, whether it is muscle mass or fat mass. Genetics will play a big role in that. And then the biggest thing about healthy body weight is if we can maintain a healthy body weight for our whole life, essentially what it does is promote good eating habits and allows for regular physical activity. Because people who maintain the same weight or this acceptable weight for their age, it's because they have good diets and they exercise regularly, and it allows them to maintain that weight a lot easier. And really that's a key point. Is eating and exercise are really the two most important things when it comes to weight, and that's actually holds true for performance as well. Is our diet plays a huge role when it comes to athletics and performance, and a lot of the times our physical conditioning and our physical fitness and our periodized plan is only 50% of what an athlete needs. The other 50% is nutrition, and they need to make sure that their nutrition is exceptional to fuel their body for the high performance that they need to put into their sport. Now, what I want to talk about now is looking at body composition and looking at evaluation and understanding the various weight conditions that we see. And there's really only 4 body weights that we need to understand, and that is obviously healthy weight or ideal weight, which is the weight we want to be at for health reasons. And then we have the other 3 classifications that lead to potential dangers in our health, and that's underweight, overweight, and obesity. So people who are underweight tend to have too little body fat, and when you have too little body fat, it actually impacts your health negatively. There's lots of physiological events that take place when we don't have enough body fat. The body needs fat. It needs fat for several physiological aspects of living, and if we don't have that body fat percentage that we need, we can have some serious systems in our body that do not function as well as they could. That could impact to severe health problems. Overweight is one of the more common ones. We've talked a little bit about it throughout the semester, and this is when we have a moderate amount of excess body fat. There's different classifications of overweight. There's people who are just slightly overweight, or moderately overweight, or greatly overweight. But regardless, as soon as we start becoming overweight, we increase our risk for those hypokinetic conditions that we've talked about: the heart disease, the high blood pressure, certain types of cancers, even to back pain. So we see that being overweight does affect health negatively. And then obesity is having an excess of body fat that adversely affects health, and obesity is really the one that we've talked about, where it looks like when we start becoming obese, not only is our health at risk, but our long-term life is at risk, because people who are obese don't tend to live as long as they should because of the health implications that obesity has. So if we look at sort of what those health implications are when it comes to body weight and being in one of these classifications, with underweight, what we tend to see is psychological as well as physiological disorders being the big issue. So the psychological disorders that we usually see with being underweight is we have the anorexia nervosa, or the bulimia nervosa, which is the eating disorders. We also can see psychological disorders such as exercise obsession or obsessive compulsive disorder with exercise or eating, and that could play obviously a negative role within our mental health, but our physical health as well, because when we're underweight, our body just does not function as well as it should. With females, what we see is menstrual dysfunction starting to happen. So because females need fat for their menstrual period, or their menstrual cycles, and when there's not enough fat, those menstrual cycles start essentially being non-existent, which could obviously pose a very serious problem to someone's reproduction system. Another aspect that we see playing a huge physiological role is our bone density decreases when we're underweight. And the reason that is because nutritionally, we just don't have the calcium needed to build the bones. So we start seeing our bones becoming a little weaker, a little more fragile, a little more susceptible to potential fractures or breaks. We also see immune function decreasing greatly when we're underweight, so our immune system just doesn't work as well, which means we're going to be more susceptible to viruses, so illnesses, get sick a lot easier. People who are underweight don't heal as fast, so like a small cut could take a very long time to heal because the immune system just isn't functioning because there's not enough fat in the body. And fat plays a big role because fat's involved in oxidization. So when we look at creation of energy, oxidization uses fat to help produce energy. And a lot of the energy that we get through oxidization is at rest, and that's for basic immune function and other functions of the various systems in the body. So being underweight can be very detrimental to our health, not so much with the hypokinetic conditions that we saw before, that we see with overweight and obesity, but really just overall system function in the body. Then we get into overweight. We see the increase in the hypokinetic conditions such as increased risk of coronary heart disease, increase in hypertension, which is blood pressure, increased cholesterol levels, increased risk of diabetes. We've increased risk of stroke. So being overweight just increases our risks to those unhealthy hypokinetic conditions. And then obesity essentially just doubles to triples those conditions within our body. So if we look at something like hypertension, an obese person's blood pressure is going to be 2.9 times worse than someone who's overweight, or their cholesterol levels are going to be 1.5 times greater than someone who's overweight, or diabetes is going to be 2.9 times worse than someone who's overweight with diabetes. So we really just see that obesity just accelerates these health problems in such a bigger spectrum that the body just is going to essentially be at its absolute worst health. And that's why we see life expectancy for an obese person drop substantially as soon as they enter into the obesity class. So we want to make sure, obviously, we keep a healthy body weight so we can be healthy individuals and avoid all these various conditions that are associated with negative body weight. So how do we determine then if our body weight is acceptable or if it's healthy or not healthy? Because obviously that plays a key factor into our health. So there's 3 ways we can determine someone's body composition and whether their body weight is acceptable or classified as healthy or not. So the most common one that many of you may have done before or have had a doctor done on you or have heard before, and that's BMI, which is the body mass index. And the body mass index is just a measurement of your height and your weight, and it essentially gives you a reading of what your weight, where your weight is on the BMI, and whether you are underweight, ideal weight, or overweight or obese. And then another method is measuring body composition, which is where we find out our body fat percentage. And again, the body fat percentage, we can see if we fall into ideal weight or underweight or overweight or obese. And then other factors that we see are assessing the pattern of fat distribution, which is just a visual of different body types and understanding what that body type's impact on health could be. The most common method we see is definitely BMI, and body composition is now starting to become really the most common and the most well used method of evaluating body weight. So let's first off look at that body mass index and talk about what it is, and I'll put a chart up so we can quickly measure our body mass index so you can see where you fall when it comes into the ideal weight or the unhealthy weight. So body mass index essentially just expresses the ratio of a person's weight to the square of their height. So BMI equals weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. And then what we'll get from that calculation is a value where we'll see if it's below 18.5, a BMI of 18.5, we'd be considered underweight, or if it is above a BMI of 30, we'll have an increased risk of health problems as being overweight. So BMI is very simplistic. Most doctors would use a BMI just quickly to assess someone's body weight to see if they are in the unhealthy weight range or underweight or overweight or obese. And this is a simplistic chart that you can use to quickly get your BMI and see where you fall within the BMI spectrum. So all of you can probably quickly figure out based on how tall you are. So it looks at your height, and then it looks at your weight in pounds without shoes. And then you just match them up, and then you go by the shades. So you can see we have our lighter color here, which would be a healthy weight. On this side here, so if you're under 18.5, you would be considered underweight. In here, so the 25 to 30 would be overweight, and then anything over 30 would be considered obese. So let's quickly do mine here so we can see what my BMI is. So I am 5'9". So if we go 5'9", draw a line over to 185 pounds and meet that up, and it looks like I have a BMI of about 29. So based on the BMI, I would be considered overweight, almost obese. So that's interesting. Looking at myself in the mirror, I wouldn't really consider myself as a overweight person or borderlining on obesity. Maybe I just have good mirrors and good self-esteem, but I'm pretty sure there's something wrong with that evaluation. Now, this is where we start seeing the BMI being a little bit problematic, because the BMI doesn't take into account muscle mass. So, if you do any sort of resistance training, the BMI is not going to be an effective measure of body weight for you, because as you can see, it put me into the overweight, almost obese classification. So this is where we see the limitations happening, right? So if we look at, someone who's 6 feet, 250 pounds, if we have the muscular person, who weighs 250. We have the muscular person who weighs 250, and we have the overweight person with more fat that weighs 250. They get the same BMI readings, all right, which obviously is incorrect, because the person with lean muscle mass and very little body fat is not going to have the same health risks that someone who has a large amount of body fat. So BMI is not the most effective measure when it comes to evaluating body weight, because it doesn't take into account muscle mass. So right off the bat, if you have any sort of muscle mass, you can't use the BMI. And last year, Stats Canada sent out the census, where everybody fills out the census for Stat Canada, and one of the things that the census looks at is weight in Canada. And one of the stats that came out of the census was 64% of Canadians have a BMI that is overweight. So essentially, the Stats Canada said 64% of our country is overweight. Now, we have to take that stat with a little bit of a grain of salt, because that Stats Canada doesn't use body composition, it uses BMI. So 64% of our country has a BMI over or in the overweight class, but that doesn't necessarily mean that out of the 64%, everyone has increased amounts of fat. We'd have to look at body composition in that case, which obviously is something that we can do with our entire country in a census. So that's why we have to really look at different surveys or different research results and look at when they say things like this amount of people are overweight, you have to look at what the evaluation was. If it was BMI, then there's lots of different variables within that BMI measure that could skew those results. Another thing that the BMI doesn't look at is anyone who's under the age of 18. So if you're under the age of 18, the BMI is not applicable to you. Females who are pregnant or nursing can't use the BMI because obviously when you're pregnant, you have another human inside you. So that's going to affect your weight. And when you're nursing, you're producing milk, which is going to increase your weight as well. Anyone who's over 65 years old cannot use the BMI as well. And then there's also certain ethnic and racial groups that can't use the BMI. Look at Scandinavian countries. Scandinavian males cannot use the BMI because the average height for a Scandinavian male is 6'5". So that would impact something like the BMI for them. So we can't really look at, the BMI is obviously not a great measure. Where the BMI would be an effective measure is to the sedentary population. So people who are sedentary could use the BMI as an evaluation tool of whether they are underweight, overweight, or at a healthy weight, or borderlining, or in obesity. So sedentary population, that is the most effective when it comes to BMI. So what we really want to look at is the evaluation of body composition. And body composition gives us a more true stat, or a true reading of our weight, because it measures not just our height and our weight. It takes into account our body fat versus our lean muscle. So it essentially gives us a body fat percentage of how much fat we have compared to lean muscle. And the way we measure it is we have underwater weighing, which is the gold standard when it comes to body composition. We have skin fold measurements, which is the more common measurement for body composition. We have bioelectrical impedance analysis, which is a rather new technology within 10 years, and every year it seems to get better and better, and has a smaller error rating. And what a bioelectrical impedance analysis is it's basically a weight scale that you stand on, and it sends a current through one side of your body through your foot, and then times how fast that current goes through one foot and then comes to the other foot. And essentially the time, how fast it is, will determine your body composition, because people with low fat percentage or high muscle, the current goes very fast, and people who have more fat on their body, the current goes a little bit slower. We see this near-infrared reactance, which kind of came out at the same time around the bioelectrical impedance analysis. It's sort of gone by the wayside now. We don't really see those anymore. And then the newest one, which is the bod pod, which is with this little spaceship thing here with the happy person inside, can give you a body composition reading. Now, most of these underwater weighing and bod pods aren't really ones that everyone can use. Underwater weighing is used for research. Bod pod we're starting to see for research as well. But sort of the bod pods are very expensive. We see them in the very trendy, health clubs have bod pods, and they cost probably about $150 to get your body composition and analyzed from it. So essentially what we look at is when we go through body composition, we get these levels of body fatness, and essentially it gives you a percentage, and that percentage can tell you if you're in essential fat or borderline or good health or marginal or over fatness. So we look at essential fat. So with women and men, we see that the percentages are actually different, and that's because women hold more fat than men because of for reproduction reasons, and we have different standards for each. So if we look at the essential fat needed for men, it's under 5%. Where women, it's under 10%. So if we see a body composition lower than that, we're sort of getting into that classification of being underweight. Borderline is 5 to 9% for men, 10 to 16% for women. High performance, so athletes, we see 5 to 15 to 10 to 23 for women. And the reason why we would see high performance being in borderline usually is because athletes are okay to have a lower body fat percentage because their systems are strong and they can handle that little that small amount of body fat. Also, their nutrition is usually very good, so they're getting enough fat in their nutrition as well, not to be having a health concern about that. Good health, so sort of where we want the general population to be, is 10 to 20% for men and 17 to 28% for women. Marginal fitness, so this is where we started getting onto the borderline of being overweight. 21 to 25% for men, 29 and 35% for women, and then anything over 25% for men, over 35% for women is over fatness. And we start looking at then getting into classifications of obesity. But generally, if we're looking at someone who is in this over fatness range, we can then start giving them the BMI evaluation because they're obviously sedentary, and then we can classify them as overweight or obese based on the BMI instead of body composition. So the various techniques when it comes to evaluating body composition, as I said, the gold standard is underwater weighing technique, which is done for most scientific research. So there's not a lot of underwater weighing body composition techniques that are available to the public. So most of us won't have our body composition done within the underwater weighing technique. So what essentially it does is it looks at muscle and fat, obviously. So it is based on the fact that muscle is more dense than fat. So muscle is like a rock, it sinks. Fat is like styrofoam, it floats. So what we do is put a person underwater, and we can estimate body density based on what the buoyant force is equal to the weight of the volume of the water that is displaced when the person gets in. So fat, because it's less dense, it occupies a larger volume, which gives a larger buoyant force. So that's what we're looking at when it comes to measuring within that underwater weighing technique. So it is the most accurate method, and as I said, you're really only going to see it in research setting. The most common one is going to be the skin fold, and what we're doing with the skin fold technique is we essentially pick up a fold of skin and measure that with something called a skin caliper. So the skin fold caliper is basically a little tool that has a little pinchers, and then a measure of millimeters. And then what we do is not look underneath, but pinch underneath the skin, or pinch the skin and try and remove it, get it off the muscle, because underneath the skin, that's where the body stores the subcutaneous fat. So when the skin is lifted, the fat layer can be actually measured. And so body fat is going to be stored in people in various places throughout the body. So the measurement of fat in one place is not always going to be an accurate measure of total body fat. So what we do is we measure several different sites, and then the thickness of those several different sites could be converted into body fat percentages with a calculation. So the skin fold, what we're trying to essentially do is pinch the skin up, or take a fold of skin, pick it up and measure it in millimeters, and then look exactly at where the highest amount of fat is stored within the 7 sites that you measure, and then it gives you a reading of exactly how much fat you have all throughout the body and gets you a percentage. Now, personally, I don't really like to do the calculation, the body fat calculation with skin fold measurements. I just like taking the measurements at the 7 sites, and then as we go through an exercise plan, re-measure and see if those skin folds are dropping as we go. So the 7 sites for measurement of skin fold test is we have the chest, so just right in between the middle, right at the middle of the chest, just by the shoulder, there's a site there that we can pinch and get a skin fold. The other area is in the middle of the triceps. We also measure the subscapularis, so a fold right beside your scapula. We measure our abdominal muscle, or our abdomen, so we measure just beside the belly button, and then on the sides of the stomach, or people may know as the love handles. Mid thigh, just over top of the quadriceps, and then the calf muscle. All right, if there's any fat deposit in the calf muscle. Those are the 7 sites we want to measure, and then get our skin folds. So the benefits of skin fold technique is, well, first off, it depending on the person who's doing it for you, it could be fairly accurate. So if you have someone who's highly skilled in the skin fold technique, you can get very accurate results. It's also very inexpensive, and it's easy to perform. All you need to do really is learn how to take the folds off the muscle, and then measure those 7 sites. And it is inexpensive, because all you need is a caliper, and those calipers are actually relatively cheap. And then it just comes down to getting practice. But as I mentioned, it is best used as a self-comparison, not really as something to calculate body fat percentage. I just never do the body fat percentage calculation with the skin fold. I just like to measure the sites and then mark them down. So some other ways of evaluating body weight is looking at the fat distribution pattern. So a couple things you can do here is you can actually do what's called the hip or the waist to hip ratio, or waist circumference, so just the measurement of your waist, and then see if that waist circumference decreases through time, through exercise and diet. We also have fat patterning, which is determining if someone has an apple-shaped body or a pear-shaped body. So someone with an apple-shaped body tends to hold more fat in the upper body, and they used to say that this would be an increased risk for chronic disease, specifically heart disease, because you have a high amount of fat in and around your heart, which is very dangerous. And then pear-shaped fat patterning is when we see fat carried in the lower body. All right, and they used to say that there was no significant increased risk of chronic disease for people who were pear-shaped. And generally what we say is men are apple-shaped, women are pear-shaped, and so because of that, men are at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. But now we're seeing that that is not the case. Women are just as much at risk for heart disease as men with a pear-shaped body frame, because that fat is, yes, it's not around any major organs like an apple-shaped fat patterning is, but it's still fat in your body, and that fat will circulate through your cardiovascular system and potentially increase cholesterol, potentially increase plaque buildup. So the fat distribution pattern tends to be not a great measure or evaluation of body weight. The waist circumference could be, because you're essentially seeing if you're getting thinner throughout time, but it's not going to give us any real evaluation of whether we're underweight, overweight, or obese. And then we have somatotyping, which is kind of an interesting one. And it's not so much about weight or evaluating weight. It's more about evaluating body physique. And somatotyping in the past was tried to use to help predict performance attributes. So some people or some coaches would use somatotyping to help determine if a person should be more in this type of sport or in this type of sport. And essentially what somatotyping does is categorizes people based on what their body essentially looks like. And they did some anthropometric measurements and then put the body or put the person into one of these three categories. So the three categories were ectomorphy, endomorphy, and mesomorphy. Endomorphy is people who tend to be thinner. Usually it's tall or thin or stretched out, as they say. And then endomorphy, people who are a little bit more broad-bodied, dominated by more body fat or roundness. And then mesomorphs are people who are muscular, very powerful, very muscular people. So the performance attributes was people who were ectomorphy, they would suggest would have more type 1 muscle fibers, which is the aerobic muscle fiber type. They would be more suited to participate in aerobic-based sports. And then mesomorphs would be people who have a lot of type 2B muscle fibers, which is the power muscle fiber type, very forceful contractions with type 2B muscle fibers. And they would be excelling more at the more anaerobic type sports, the more power type sports. So that's how we used to use somatotyping as sort of a way to predict performance attributes. But now, of course, the best way to predict performance attributes is through physical testing and actually testing the various systems of the body to see if you can excel in aerobic or anaerobic sports.